lot of nuts!
Grand Theft Auto 6, a game that is more myth than reality at this point in time. The sequel to Grand Theft Auto 5, which released damn near 13 years ago, has finally come out for pre-order as of June 25th. And it almost feels unreal. This is a game that has been in development and rumored to be released for so long that we have numerous memes such as Grand Theft Auto 6 is coming out, hell must have frozen over, as well as we actually got XYZ before GTA 6. Grand Theft Auto 5 is a legendary video game. It is one that people have been playing for over a decade, and it's no surprise given the fact that Grand Theft Auto 6 still hasn't come out at the date of this recording. GTA 5 has actually been released 4 separate times, from the PS3 to the PC to the PS4 and the PS5 at this point. This is a game that has more releases than the games have entries. That's not true, but it's close enough to almost sound funny. Despite this, one would imagine that people would be talking about the fact that Grand Theft Auto 6 finally looking to come out for real in November of this year. With the pre-releases and the pre-orders now being live, this is the first real concrete piece of evidence we have that this game might be more than just myth since the original trailer started coming out. But despite this, people's conversations have not been around the hype of now having a brand new edition of Grand Theft Auto to play on. Rather, most of the conversation online has been surrounding the price of GTA 6 and the fact that the pre-orders have the base level game set at $80. This is an important detail, and it explains why a lot of conversation is surrounding the price of Grand Theft Auto 6, because with how big Grand Theft Auto 6 is set to be, probably the biggest video game release ever, and might very well be the biggest video game release ever for quite a while, until God forbid Grand Theft Auto 7 rears its ugly head into online conversations. But the fact that GTA 6 is not only going to cost this much money, but is also following in the footsteps of some other predatory practices in the video game industry, the fact that this game is set to cost this much money alongside a number of other details is really looking to be setting a bad precedent for everybody involved, at least as far as consumers are concerned. And I think it's important that we take a second to break down exactly why it is that so many people are talking about the price of GTA 6. First of all, what is $80? In the context of video games, is $80 a lot of money? GTA 6 has evidently been in development for at least a decade at this point, rumored to have cost over $2 billion in development. Is it any surprise that the tried and true price of $60 could perhaps not be appropriate for a game of this magnitude? In fact, it's not even the first video game to release at this $80 price tag. Take a look at the latest release of Mario Kart, for instance, and that was like a year ago at this point. It's not even the first video game to cost $80. Why has it become the flagship face of this price tag for an $80 video game? The $60 price tag, which historically has been what brand new video games have cost for the better part of almost 15 years at this point, was set by Activision with the release of Call of Duty 2 on the Xbox 360. Prior to that, video games had been sitting for about $50 since, I don't know, the early 2000s or something like that. But it was with the release of Call of Duty 2, a title that people knew was going to be next generation, highly anticipated, and thoroughly purchased, that Activision made the decision to bump up the price of their video game by another $10, setting the standard for $60. And it paid out for them. In fact, according to my notes, nearly 50% of every Xbox that was sold alongside a copy of Call of Duty 2, making it one of the most successful video games to be released in that generation of consoles. So it seems as though the extra $10 that gamers were paying for that video game didn't necessarily harm the reception of that video game. Critics worldwide agreed that Call of Duty 2 was a pretty solid game, and Activision cemented the idea that if your game was good enough, highly anticipated enough, and was received well by gamers, then it could justify this higher price tag. Fast forward to 2020, and we now have some of the first video games that are coming out at the $70 price tag. The first major of which is the remake of Demon's Souls. This is the first game by FromSoft that was released before Dark Souls, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, any of that. This is a 2020 remake of their first game ever, and it was priced at $69.99. nice. And this game was critically loved. Everybody who was a fan of FromSoft, everybody who started to play Dark Souls and wanted to play the original but wasn't a big fan of the visual fidelity or the graphics or what have you, they made a new 2020 version of that PS2 era video game, and it was great. Critically acclaimed. Everybody loved playing that video game. Very few complaints to my understanding about the fact that that game was $70. The original game did not have any DLC, and so the re-released version of it was, the entirety of the video game. And so it seems as though you can justify that bigger price tag even if it isn't a wholly original remake or isn't a sequel to a major franchise like Call of Duty 2 was, but rather just if you make a really solid game with a really solid fan base, then perhaps you can justify a more premium price tag as shown by the remake of Demon's Souls. The second video game that would release at $70, the second major one at least, is NBA 2K21, a basketball simulator that has been releasing a new video game every single year for the better part of several decades, whether or not they have any new major developments in gameplay, quality, multiplayer, game engine, or anything. These guys have just made an NBA 2K whatever for 20 plus years at this point, and that's also at $70? No major franchise, no major remakes. It's just following in the footsteps that was set by a much more groundbreaking development in the Demon's Souls remake. That seems a little bit unearned, to say the least. Not only that, but fast forward 2 more years and we get the release of Elden Ring, the newest entry into the Demon's Souls franchise, the remake of the first game that FromSoft ever made. From the PS2 era, released at $70, and yet Elden Ring, what some would argue to be the greatest video game to ever be released to date, was released 2 years later at $60. So it feels clear that it isn't necessarily the quality of the video game or the innovation of the game studio that is deciding whether or not a game costs $10 more or $10 less. Perhaps it's just sort of a shot in the dark at how greedy the game developers are. Demon's Souls was a remake, and so they weren't exactly planning on adding new DLCs or multiplayer or patches in the future, one could imagine. Perhaps FromSoft imagined that once they made that remake, they were only going to get one shot at getting as much money as they could out of old fans buying the remake of their first game ever, and so priced it higher versus something like Elden Ring, where they knew they would continue to develop this game with more DLC and more patches. There would be more opportunities to get players to purchase DLCs or in-game armor or what have you. Maybe it made sense for them to more standardize the price of that at $60, knowing that the $20, $30, $40 DLCs down the road might make up for it. That makes sense, I guess. And now here we are in 2026. In fact, the first $79.99, $80 price tag video game didn't even occur this year. It was last year with Mario Kart World. Nintendo notoriously pricing their games at $60 regardless of how old they are. I've got re-releases of like Game Boy Advance titles on my Nintendo Switch that are $50 30 years after they've been released. Nintendo is notorious for never really dropping the prices of their AAA titles or their first-party franchised works with Mario and Pokemon and Zelda and what have you. But $80 for a Mario Kart game, even at the time of release, was a little bit ridiculous, but it did sort of set the standard. And now, in 2026, with everybody holding their breath, are now taking a look at the fact that the pre-orders for Grand Theft Auto 6 are going to be $80 going forward. It's clear that the standard has been set. Some of you might be wondering, hey, Sumito, with Grand Theft Auto 6 now releasing, let's hope, in 2026, that means that video games have arguably only raised in price by like $20 over the course of the last 20 years. Surely that's not even that big of a deal when you factor in inflation, right? It's a little more complicated than that. $80 video games in 2026, when video games used to cost $60 back in 2010 or what have you, isn't even that big of a price jump. This is the argument that you will hear from people defending $80 video games. And to be fair, when you take a look at it from a surface level analysis, it almost makes sense. Over the course of 15, 20 years, for something to only go up in $20 doesn't even really seem like that big of a price jump once you factor in inflation, as people like to call it. 20 years ago, if something cost $60, that would be the equivalent of it costing almost $90 in today's money once you factor in inflation. Therefore, the video games only going up to $80 arguably kind of means that it's cheaper to buy a video game today for 80 bucks than it would have been for video games to cost $60 back in 2005 or whenever it is. This is the argument that was made by Video Game Donkey in his video about video game pricing back like 4 years ago at this point, where he made the argument that buying the Atari 2600 in the 1990s or whenever it was released for $200 would be the equivalent of currently purchasing that video game console for $900. And obviously the idea of purchasing even a PS5 at this point for $900 is ridiculous and makes one wonder, why is anybody complaining about the price of video games when, according to inflation, they were historically so much more expensive back then? The reason for this obviously is economics and the current economic situation that we're in. Yes, it is the case that $200 today is not the same as $200 20 years ago because of inflation. But the way that people talk about inflation in the context of video games is a little bit misleading, because what they're really talking about is purchasing power and completely ignoring income power, if that makes sense. They take a look at $200 back in the 1990s and make the assumption that the Atari 2600 that cost $200 back then would be the equivalent of costing $900 nowadays, because that's what the dollar is worth. But they completely ignore how much more difficult it is to make $200, A, and B, to have $200 to spend. How is it that anybody was able to afford the equivalent of a $900 video game console back in the 90s? The main thing you want to factor in is the fact that minimum wage has not increased in the better part of the last 15 years. And so the amount of work that it takes to make $200 15 years ago is still about the amount of work it takes to make $200 in today's money. Despite this, the fact that the price of everything have gone up with inflation, according to the fact that minimum wage has remained at $7.25 for almost 40% of the United States over the course of the last 15 years. Half of the country still has the same amount of minimum wage income that they would have made 15 years ago as they do today, and that is not adjusting for the fact that video games have gone up in that 15 years of price. But that's a teeny bit misleading. Not everybody makes minimum wage. Plus, 30 of the 50 states have raised the federal minimum wage on a state level up to upwards of $15 an hour, which is double, 100% more money, which is fantastic, and that should accommodate the fact that people can buy more video games, right? Except, you have to remember that video games are very much a entertainment, a commodity that people don't need to buy, as opposed to things like a college education, a car to be able to get to work, the rent for where you live, all of which have raised 40, 50, 60, 70% in that same 15-year time span. 100% more money doesn't mean a lot when rent has gone up 40% in that same amount of time. College educations have gone up 60% in that same amount of time. A brand new car in the United States is now at the median price of $50,000. Well, just don't buy a brand new car, except used car prices have also gone up 70% in that last 15 years, thanks to tariffs, taxes, inflation, and COVID messing up industries in numerous situations. 100% more money, even if it means doubling minimum wage, doesn't mean a ton when the stuff that you have to spend money on is now costing way more than 100% more money. It doesn't leave as much money for you to spend on something like video games, which at the end of the day is something you don't have to spend money on, especially if you don't have the money to spend on it. So how is it possible that back in the 90s, people were able to spend the equivalent of $900 on a home video game console? They had the money, because houses cost like $100,000 back then. College was half the price. Your car was paid off. Your mom could stay at home and cook while your dad worked a single 40-hour industry job and still made enough money to put 2 kids through college. It's easy to spend $900 on a video game when everything else in your life is already taken care of, which is very much not so much the case in today's time. And I know what you're thinking, Sumito, is it really the entire industry of economics that are coming into play when it comes into the conversation of why video games should or should not cost $20 more? I have intentionally made minimum wage for the last 20 years, and I'm incredibly angry over the $80 price. Personally, I've spent the last 20 years making absolutely sure my income never increased, even though statistically blue and white collar jobs have increased steadily. Promotions declined. Raises insulted. consulting. Better opportunities? Not interested. I could have learned a trade, gone to college, joined the military, worked my way up in McDonald's, or literally done anything to increase my earning potential, but that would have ruined the argument. Companies should freeze prices forever because I made a series of bad career decisions. I mention all of this talk about minimum wage, cost of living, earning potential, and what have you historically over the last 15-20 years, despite the fact that this argument gets memed to death online, as I just read out to you with that LARPing Redditor as somebody who has never increased his earning potential, because it's an important facet to pay attention to. Sure, the just taking a look at minimum wage in an isolated bubble might only make sense if you are that previous Redditor who never does anything to earn more than the federally mandated minimum wage. But it is one thing to factor in when taking a look at the overall economy of which everybody lives in. Is somebody currently who has been working for the last 15 years still making the same $7 an hour that they were making 15 years ago? I would hope not. Obviously, I would hope that person has been promoted, found new opportunities, gone to college, learned a trade, or what have you. But the important thing to note is that that is the situation that we live in the US. And when you factor in things like industries being disrupted by COVID, shaking up the prices of things, eggs and gas costing as much as they do, tariffs, taxes, political climates, and what have you, there's just a lot more things that people need to pay money towards that might make it so that they have less money to put towards something like video games. This argument that it's only $20 extra, one dinner at Applebee's worth of money, doesn't factor in the entire picture of the fact that maybe you had $60 to spend on video games back then, but you might not have that $60 to spend on a video game now. And the fact that that video game now is $80 might make it the difference between you even buying a video game versus back then when you had so much more money to spend. That's my main point when people talk about inflation when it comes to video games. It gets simplified down to, listen, video games have been $60 for 15 years. If you bought a video game for $60 15 years ago, you were paying the equivalent of $90 today. Why are you even complaining that video games are going up to $80? You were basically getting a discount up to this point. And that's not the entire picture. Video games for $60, the equivalent of today's $90, back when college was the equivalent of today's 50% less. Back when a used Honda Civic with 150,000 miles didn't cost you $12,000 on the average end of things. And the fact that people need to spend more money on these things means they have less money to spend on video games. If I could pick between paying today's equivalent of $90 back when houses only cost $100,000, I would take that trade any day of the week. But that's not the reality that we live in. And so that begs the question, why does video game price even need to go up? If we take a look at the modern industry of video games, there are plenty of games that people have sunk many an hour into. Stardew Valley, Silksong, Slay the Spire, what have you, that cost $20, $30 that still manage to be video games that people will dump hundreds and hundreds of hours into. Why does the price need to go up at all? If you take a look at League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Valorant, there are video games that cost $0 whatsoever, but still make millions of dollars a year in pay-to-win skins, in loot boxes, in battle passes. Why is it that Grand Theft Auto 6 doesn't implement one of these situations so that they can make it so the game still maintains a $60 price tag, or arguably is even cheaper than that?
If the game was $30, people would complain. If the game was sold at a lower price, people would actually underhype their own game, and people would say, dude, they're probably selling it way lower on the market price because it's a low quality product, and if they would actually kill their own hype if they put it really cheap. You know it for a fact. You know it, and it's crazy that you'll deny it. If they underprice their games, they would kill their own hype.
If GTA 6 was cheaper, people would look down on it. It would be perceived as a worse quality project, a worse quality product, because it's being released at the price of like an indie, smaller game studio title. This is going to be, without a question, the biggest video game release of all time. It only makes sense that it carries a premium price tag in order to match the expectations that are being released alongside this video game. And I can see why people make that argument. At the end of the day, this is sales and marketing. They're going to price this video game at the absolute maximum that they feel like they are going to make as many sales as possible. Why would they make it half the price? So that 10% more people buy it that weren't going to buy it otherwise because it was expensive? 15% more people pick up Grand Theft Auto 6 just because it's a good deal rather than the fact that they think it's a good video game? This is the biggest video game ever. Arguably, if they decided to make this video game $200, people would still be buying this thing the day that it came out. But it's not the fact that the game is as expensive as it is that has caused so much controversy. It's the fact that they're milking so much out of it. One would expect that if they were going to put this premium price tag on such a expected video game, something that people have overhyped so much, that they would at the very least make it a premium product. And it is clear with the pre-release and the pre-orders of Grand Theft Auto 6 that it's starting to feel a little bit less the case. First of all, 13 years in development. Let's call it 10 years in development. Maybe they weren't developing Grand Theft Auto 6 right when Grand Theft Auto 5 was released on the Xbox 360 13 years ago at this point. A decade, 10 years in development. It is only going to be true that this game is going to fail to meet some expectations. That's just the reality of it. Even with Elden Ring being as fantastic of a video game as it was met with much criticism when it was first released. People were saying that the game was too difficult. It was a little bit of a buggy mess, but despite that, people enjoyed that game because it's not like everybody was sitting around for the equivalent of Dark Souls 4 to be Dark Souls 4, 5, 6, and a bunch of DLCs on top of it. It didn't have the hype that Grand Theft Auto 6 has had for the better part of the last 10 years. It only makes sense that when this game comes out, people are going to find some small gripes with it. And because of that, it makes it feel as though there's really going to be no situation where this is going to be a perfect video game. And if we take a look at the release of Grand Theft Auto 5, the fact that it took 2 years before Grand Theft Auto 5 even released on PC, that they did this stupid exclusive release to only consoles, limiting the ability for people to play on PC, modify the game, and make Grand Theft Auto Online where people can play online and do RP servers, arguably the biggest part of Grand Theft Auto 5 after the initial release. Rockstar isn't exactly in the position where we can trust them to release the absolute best video game day one to the point where it makes sense for them to charge the absolute most money possible. Most times, Grand Theft Auto, when released, isn't the perfect video game day one, at least as far as PCs are concerned. I don't see Grand Theft Auto 6 being any different. And Rockstar has already proven with the pre-release orders going live for Grand Theft Auto 6 that they are following in the footsteps of some other less than savory industry practices. For instance, the physical box that you are purchasing for Grand Theft Auto 6 will not contain a game disc. Will not contain a game disc. Despite the fact that you are going to get a physical package for the video game that you are purchasing, it will only contain a download code for Grand Theft Auto 6. And if you don't fully understand why that's an issue, take a look at the numerous videos that I have made talking about stop killing games. Live service video games are inherently a ethereal situation right now. More and more video games are getting to the point where they are labeling a purchase that a user makes to be a license to play the game rather than a full-on ownership of the game, meaning that they can revoke your ability to play a video game, to continue to do what you will with a video game that you purchased and you owned, simply because they decide to stop providing support for it. And the fact that Grand Theft Auto 6 is now following in the footsteps of not giving you a physical disc of which you can play Grand Theft Auto 6 whenever and however you want to just means that they are cutting costs. They are saving the equivalent of $3 on a Blu-ray disc that can easily... I don't want to hear this argument of GTA 6 is too big to fit on a disc. Shut up. The fact that they are limiting your ability to actually own the game doesn't bode very well for the longevity of this thing. I mean, sure, they've kept Grand Theft Auto 5 running for the better part of the last 10 years without any major issue, but the fact that you don't even physically own this thing that you are paying so much money for means that at any point if Rockstar decides, hey, we don't want you to be able to play Grand Theft Auto 6 online in general, we're completely changing up what it is that you're purchasing after you've purchased it, just puts the entirety of the money that you're putting into their wallets and takes the game that you should be receiving in exchange completely in the control of the people who have taken 10 years to make the thing. Your money not only is costing more, but it's not even going as far as it used to. People trying to justify why GTA 6's pre-orders aren't that bad are missing the point entirely. Grand Theft Auto 6's physical edition, the one that you have to go to a store and pick up yourself, does not even come with a disc. That is absurdly abhorrent. You know why some people like buying physical media? Because if you don't like the game, you have the freedom to take it back to the store and sell it. If you buy the physical edition of Grand Theft Auto 6, you don't even get to do that. All you get is a piece of goddamn plastic with a stupid download code inside, and people are okay with this? What if Grand Theft Auto 6 isn't as good as we thought? What if, like me, you weren't really a fan of the Grand Theft Auto Online and the game doesn't live up to the hype, which is a totally valid concern in this gaming landscape? It doesn't matter if we're talking about Rockstar or not. You bought the physical edition of the game, which is of literally zero value to anyone, and you can't even get rid of it if you wanted to. And the top comment reads, "Can sell a $100 complete version of a game. When Nintendo did it with Mario Kart, it created a spark. Grand Theft Auto will pour gallons of gasoline on that spark." That's the big issue, right? That's the big reason why this conversation around how much Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to cost is as much of a conversation as it is. The game at pre-order base is $80. The advanced version with some, extra salons, haircuts, jackets, and what have you is $100. Before this video game has even come out, it has already got the practice of having you pay extra money to get extra video game stuff for a video game that hasn't even released yet and isn't even going to give you a physical disc for you to be able to play, return, sell if you want to, or God forbid, just to be able to continue playing when Rockstar decides they don't want you to be able to play with this toy that they gave you anymore and feel like that power should be in the hands of the consumer. And it's setting a tone for every other video game on the market. What if Grand Theft Auto 6 has a battle pass? What if they make it so that every month there's another $15 you can play that unlocks a bunch of extra stuff and they make more money that way? What if Grand Theft Auto 6 has seasonal passes for you to do, crates that you can unlock, more paid DLCs? What if the entirety of Grand Theft Auto 6 to be able to play bonus missions and what have you ends up costing you $30, $40, $50 more every single time they come out with where is it going to end? Are we going to be okay with a $300 Grand Theft Auto Ultimate Pack that comes with every mission that arguably should have already been in the game to begin with, but what can you do about it? Because you paid for a string of 16 digits on a piece of paper in a box that's otherwise empty? Is this really the tone we want to set for every video game going forward? Because this is the thing that is going to set the standard. The fact that there's already a $100 Ultimate version that comes with extra cosmetics pisses me off, because it's like, you're the most hyped video game of all time. Like, they should have just made the game $100. At least if you're gonna stick a giant middle finger to everybody who wants to purchase your game, do it loud and proud. The fact that there's an $80 lackluster version of a game that people have been salivating over for the better part of the last decade just feels like Rockstar spitting in your face a little bit. And honestly, that's the big reason that this is as much of a conversation as it is. This isn't just the next Grand Theft Auto game. This isn't just the next big video game that's going to be $80. This is going to be a hallmark watershed moment in video game pricing. The fact that Grand Theft Auto is going to have a ton of people purchasing it for the full ultimate price of $100 is going to have ramifications on the video game industry for quite a while. Mark my words before you know it. Because Grand Theft Auto is going to release and be as successful as it is at this $80 price tag, it won't be long before $60 for an indie video game becomes the norm. Slay the Spire 3 is going to be $65. as an indie title, and people are going to be like, oh man, that's a pretty good deal. Indie video games, small Stardew Valley, the new Stardew Valley game, the Haunted Chocolatier, is going to be $60, and that's going to be the indie pricing. That's going to be what a small, casual, cozy video game is going to be now that that price tag is no longer taken up by AAA titles. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't make enough money here on YouTube to keep paying $80 for video games. But God knows I'm going to buy GTA 6 when it releases. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe if you want to catch more of mine coming in the future, and I will catch you guys next week. Spisu!